It was pouring, the kind of rain that seeps through your coat and into your bones. I was just trying to get home from campus when I saw him, an older man shivering beneath a flickering streetlight. I gave him my last sandwich, thinking it was nothing. But the look in his eyes, it was like he knew me. I went to bed soaked and exhausted, telling myself I'd never see him again. The next morning, a knock rattled my door. When I opened it, the same man stood there, holding a small USB, and said, "We need to talk about your family." The rain hadn't stopped since last night. Through the window, the world was a blur of gray, but inside our living room, everything was warm and bright. Jake was in the center, grinning at his phone, live streaming to hundreds of viewers. His brand new sports car gleamed in the driveway outside, its wet surface catching the light like it had been placed there for a movie scene. "That's the leather interior," Jake bragged, tilting the camera to show the seats. "Straight from Italy. Custom order." The sound of notifications pinging filled the room. My parents sat beside him, their smiles wide, nodding along as if he'd just cured a disease. I sat on the far end of the couch, half hidden by the armrest. My phone buzzed with a notification from the bursar's office, a reminder that my tuition payment was overdue. I ignored it, staring at the back of my brother's head. "Jake, you're going places," Dad said, clapping his shoulder. Mom beamed, her hand on Jake's knee. No one looked at me. No one asked how my day had been. Have you ever been in a room where everyone is smiling? Except you? Jake kept talking. My parents kept laughing. And I kept shrinking into my corner. I was about to slip away quietly when I heard my mother say my name. At least Lena isn't expecting us to buy her a car. Her voice was coated in sugar but sharp enough to cut. If I'd left the room 5 seconds earlier, I wouldn't have heard my mother say my name like that. I froze, my hand still on the couch cushion. They moved on quickly, laughing at another one of Jake's jokes, but I couldn't unhear it. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the kitchen with my laptop. I opened my email, scrolling through my inbox, looking for the scholarship committee's follow-up. It wasn't there. The acceptance email I'd been waiting for had vanished. I checked my trash folder. Empty. My pulse quickened. I didn't realize Mom had a habit of helping with my emails until I remembered seeing her at my desk last week. My throat tightened. She'd done this before. Accidentally deleting messages from part-time job offers because she thought they weren't worth my time. I pushed away from the table and went to the attic. Dust clung to my sweater as I pulled open old boxes, searching for anything that might explain why she wanted me to fail. That's when I found it. A folder labeled in my father's handwriting. Inside, crisp and yellowed papers. A financial agreement. A settlement contract. One name jumped out at me. Thomas Weller. It meant nothing at first, but the signature date was nearly 20 years ago. The year I was born. My fingers trembled as I held the paper up to the dim bulb. Why would my father's name be on a contract with a stranger dated so close to my birth? I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, trying to piece together the fragments. The settlement involved property rights and something about a trust transfer. But the language was dense, full of legal terms I didn't fully understand. Still, the name burned in my mind. Thomas Weller. The rain outside tapped against the roof like impatient fingers. My thoughts slipped back to childhood. Those endless afternoons where I'd present a perfect report card to my parents, only to be met with distracted nods, followed by Jake bursting into the room, announcing he'd made varsity, stealing the moment completely. I'd learned early to make myself small, to offer my help quietly in the kitchen, to stay out of the way during their celebrations. I'd told myself it was just the way families worked. But tonight, sitting in the attic with the rain as my only witness, I felt something different. It wasn't just neglect. It was intentional. I put the papers back carefully, tucking them under my sweater. Downstairs, I opened my laptop again, this time typing Thomas Weller into the search bar. Nothing useful came up. No social media, no LinkedIn, just an old court docket hidden behind a paywall. I clicked off, frustration boiling. That's when my phone buzzed. A new message on Instagram. From an account with no profile picture, no posts, no followers. Ask your father about Thomas Weller before it's too late. I stared at the words, the cursor blinking at the end of the sentence like it was daring me to reply. My reflection in the darkened screen looked pale, almost ghost-like. I had no idea who was behind the message, but the knot in my stomach told me one thing. This wasn't random. I typed back, my fingers hesitant. "Who are you?" The reply came faster than I expected. Someone who knows the truth. After that message, sleep became a stranger. I threw myself into classes, determined to leave no room for questions I couldn't answer. Between lectures, I worked shifts at a coffee shop near campus, memorizing orders, smiling at strangers, pretending my life wasn't coming apart at the seams. On weekends, I signed up for community service, serving meals, packing clothes for shelters, sweeping the damp floors of soup kitchens. Every minute spent helping someone else felt like a way to balance the scales, as if doing good could somehow erase the unease gnawing at me. One night, the rain returned, colder and heavier than before. My shift had ended late, and I was cutting through an alley toward the bus stop when I saw him. An older man hunched under a flickering neon sign, his coat thin, his head bowed. Water pooled around his shoes. "Sir?" I called, stepping closer. His breathing was shallow, his lips pale. Without thinking, I shrugged off my scarf and wrapped it around his neck. "You need to get inside somewhere warm." He mumbled something I couldn't catch. Then his knees buckled. I caught him awkwardly, guiding him under a nearby awning. My phone buzzed, a notification that someone nearby was live streaming. I didn't know until later that a TikTok video was already capturing the scene. Me, drenched, cradling a stranger's head, calling for help. An ambulance was on its way when his eyes opened, cloudy but sharp. He studied my face like I was an unfinished puzzle. "Lena." I froze. "How do you know my name?" "You were in the picture." His voice cracked. "Mitchell family. 15 years ago. In your father's office." I felt the rain sliding down my spine. "You must be mistaken." His grip tightened weakly around my wrist. "I know who you really are." Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed again. The paramedics arrived, lifting him onto a stretcher. I watched them disappear into the night, my hair plastered to my face, the words replayed in my mind and on a loop. By morning, I had convinced myself it was coincidence. That belief lasted exactly until I heard the knock. It was firm, measured, not the kind you could ignore. I opened the door to find the same man from last night, cleaner now, though still in the same worn coat. He held a small USB drive between 2 fingers. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. He moved slowly, lowering himself into the only chair by my desk. "My name's Thomas Weller. I think you've seen it before." The contract in the attic flashed in my mind. I didn't answer, just waited. "This drive has everything," he said. "Court records, bank transfers, statements. Your father was the attorney for the people who took my house." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Took everything." I hesitated, my nails digging into my palm. "That doesn't mean it was wrong. Maybe they had the law on their side. "Law isn't always justice," he said quietly. "You'll see for yourself." When he left, I plugged the USB into my laptop. Folders opened like doors I wasn't ready to walk through. Scanned legal documents, bank ledgers, signed affidavits. The story unfolded in black and white. A property dispute, a foreclosure, the Mitchell name on every decisive signature. The dates matched the settlement I'd found in the attic. I sat back, my head pounding. Thomas's account painted my father not as a hero of the law, but as someone who'd leveraged every loophole to destroy a man's life. Still, there was the other side of it. My father's version, the one I'd heard since childhood, that he defended people who needed him, that he never took a case unless he believed in it. Could Thomas be bending the truth to fit his own bitterness? I closed my laptop, pressing my palms into my eyes. The rain outside was softer tonight, a steady whisper instead of a roar. I thought of Thomas alone under that neon sign, and of my parents smiling beside Jake. Which version of the truth was I supposed to believe? I looked at the USB again. Among the folders was one that didn't match the rest, labeled in plain text, "For Lena, only open when ready." My thumb hovered over the trackpad. Ready for what? It took me 3 days to work up the courage to open the file. 3 days of staring at that USB on my desk, of telling myself it was probably nothing, that whatever it contained couldn't change who I already was. I was wrong. The folder labeled "For Lena" held a single PDF. My heart thudded as the document loaded. My birth certificate. But the name under "Father" wasn't Mitchell. It was Samuel Cross. The letters swam before my eyes. I whispered the name out loud, as if saying it would make it real. Samuel Cross. Not the man who raised me, not the man who had stood at my graduation or signed my college paperwork. Someone else entirely. I leaned back in my chair, cold crawling up my spine despite the heating. My mind replayed every interaction with my father, every moment he had looked me in the eye and called me my daughter. By midnight, I was searching for Samuel Cross online. The results were scattered. An old news article about a small-town mechanic, a charity fundraiser from 10 years ago, an archived wedding announcement with his name buried in the list of attendees. No pictures that looked recent. The next day, I tracked down old contacts from my father's law firm. Most refused to speak to me. One, a retired paralegal named Evelyn Harper, agreed to meet in a quiet cafe on the edge of the city. She was in her 60s, her eyes sharp but kind. "I shouldn't be telling you this," she began, stirring her coffee slowly. "But your father, your legal father, paid a substantial amount to a man named Samuel Cross the week you were born." I gripped the edge of the table. "Why?" "To make sure he stayed out of the picture," Evelyn said. Her gaze flicked to the window, as if checking for anyone listening. "Your mother, she was in love with Samuel, but your father wanted control. The payment was a way to secure that control." The world tilted slightly. I opened my mouth to respond, but Evelyn slid her phone across the table. "I found this in an old backup drive before I left the firm. I think you should hear it." I pressed play. The voice that filled the tiny speaker was my mother's, younger and raw with desperation. "Please," she sobbed, "don't take her away from me. I'll do whatever you want, just don't take the baby." The sound cracked, the recording cutting off suddenly. My throat tightened until I could barely swallow. By the time I left the cafe, the sun was sinking low, throwing long shadows across the pavement. The city felt different, colder, less stable, as if the ground beneath my feet had shifted permanently. That night, I packed my essentials. I couldn't stay in the dorm. I needed distance, space to think, without my family's shadow looming over me. Through a friend, I found a shared apartment in a worn brick building, home to a small group of activists working on housing rights. They didn't ask many questions, just welcomed me in with mismatched mugs of tea and second-hand blankets. Within a week, I was absorbed into their world, organizing food drives, writing op-eds under pseudonyms, attending late-night meetings about city council proposals. It was easier to breathe here, among people who cared about causes bigger than themselves. I started a blog, anonymous, sharing fragments of Thomas's story and others like it. I called it Daughter of the Defendant. Each post was written like a case file, dates, events, names redacted. But the anger behind them was real, and readers felt it. Messages poured in from people who'd faced the same kind of injustice. One night, the apartment smelled of garlic and rosemary as we cooked pasta together. Someone played an old jazz record in the corner, the soft crackle between songs wrapping the room in warmth. I chopped tomatoes while one of the others, Maya, told a story about protesting in the rain, her laughter ringing against the walls. For the first time in years, I felt something like home. Not the home where walls echoed with Jake's voice and my parents' praise, but a place where my presence mattered without conditions. Here I wasn't the forgotten daughter or the inconvenient truth. I was just Lena. I sat back in my chair after dinner, watching the others argue good-naturedly over who would do the dishes. My chest ached, not with sadness, but with a fragile kind of hope. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. No greeting, no name. Just 6 words. They know where you are. I stared at it until the jazz faded into silence. They didn't call ahead. They never did. 1 minute I was sorting donations in the living room. The next, my parents and Jake were standing in the doorway of the activist's apartment, their expensive coats dripping rain onto the warped wooden floor. The room went still. "We need to talk," my father said, his voice low, deliberate. The others exchanged glances and quietly slipped out, leaving me alone with the 3 people who had defined my life. "We know about the blog," Dad began. "You're going to take it down, tonight." I crossed my arms. "No." "This isn't a debate," he snapped. "You're destroying our reputation with these lies." "They're not lies." I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying for weeks, and slid the DNA results across the coffee table. "Read it." My father's jaw tightened. He didn't move, but Jake picked up the paper. His eyes flicked over the words, then to me. No surprise, no shock. Just a faint smirk. "You knew," I said, the realization hitting like ice water. Jake shrugged. "Of course I knew. I've known for years. Thought you'd figure it out sooner." "And you deleted my scholarship email," I said, my voice trembling more with anger than fear. "Why waste money on you?" he said. "It was better for everyone." My father didn't correct him. He just stared at me, cold and silent. The air in the room thickened until I could hardly breathe. That's when my mother stood up. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, as she smoothed the front of her coat. "She wasn't supposed to survive," she said softly. The words landed like a punch, leaving the room in absolute silence. Even Jake's smirk faltered. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Someone, maybe one of the activists, maybe a neighbor, had recorded part of the argument and leaked it online. The video didn't capture everything, but it caught enough. My father's demand to take the blog down, my accusation about the scholarship, my mother's cryptic final line. Reporters camped outside my building. Jake's brand sponsorships evaporated within days. His once flawless image was shredded across social media. My father's law firm announced a temporary leave of absence, while the state bar opened an investigation into his past cases. I tried to block it out, but the noise followed me everywhere, until the day a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a thick envelope, my name written in block letters across the front. The letter inside was long, written in a firm, careful hand. Samuel Cross. He'd heard about me through the news, and though the circumstances were ugly, he was glad I finally knew the truth. He wanted to meet. I read it twice, then tucked it back into the envelope. My chest felt heavy. Not with dread, but with a strange anticipation. Later that afternoon, I sat alone in a quiet cafe. The rain tapped gently against the windows, the air filled with the low hum of conversation. I pulled a notebook from my bag and began to write. Not to Samuel, but to Thomas. I told him about the chaos, about the truth coming out, about my mother's haunting words. I told him I wished I could ask what he knew, that I missed the way he looked at me like I was worth listening to. The words spilled out faster than I could catch them. When I finally stopped, the light outside had dimmed, and the barista was stacking chairs on tables. I closed the notebook, slipping it back into my bag. The envelope from Samuel was still there. I opened it again, and something slipped out. A photograph. It was old, faded, the edges curling. In it, I was maybe 3 years old, sitting on the shoulders of a man whose smile was unmistakable. Thomas Weller. Samuel Cross was taller than I'd imagined, his hair silvered but his eyes startlingly familiar. My eyes, reflected back at me. We met in a quiet park just outside the city, the winter air crisp and sharp. He extended his hand, then seemed to think better of it, and pulled me into a brief, hesitant hug. "I knew this day would come," he said, motioning to a bench. "I just didn't think it would be like this." We sat, and he told me the truth, or at least his truth. He and Thomas had been inseparable in their 20s, working together to restore old houses. That was how he met my mother. They fell in love quickly, but Samuel was still struggling financially. When she became pregnant, my legal father, Mitchell, saw an opportunity. He offered security, wealth, a name. But it came with a condition. Samuel had to walk away. "He paid me enough to start over," Samuel admitted, his voice low. "I told myself it was for you, to give you a better life. But Mitchell didn't just want to raise you. He wanted to erase me." I didn't know whether to feel betrayed, grateful, or both. The man sitting beside me had given up his place in my life, but I could see the cost etched into the lines of his face. When we parted, he pressed a small envelope into my hand. "From Thomas," he said. "He wanted you to have it." Later that week, I visited Thomas's grave. The cemetery was quiet, the grass damp under my boots. I knelt, brushing leaves from the stone, and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, his handwriting looping and deliberate. "Lena, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But you need to know. There's a part of your story that no one else can tell you. I left something for you, a piece of my life that can only be unlocked by you. Follow the trail, and you'll find it. I believe in the woman you're becoming." My fingers traced the final line. "Only you can open it." The search led me to a small storage unit Thomas had rented under an alias. Inside, dust clung to everything, but in the far corner was a locked metal trunk. The key, I realized, was the pendant Thomas had given me the night we first met, a simple brass charm I'd worn without understanding. Inside the trunk was a modest sum of money, old photographs, and letters from people Thomas had helped. Enough to make a difference, though not enough to tempt greed. I knew instantly what I wanted to do. Within a month, the Thomas Weller Scholarship Fund was born, dedicated to students who had been abandoned or unsupported by their families. Applications poured in, each story reminding me why this mattered. When a journalist reached out asking for an interview, I said yes. Sitting under the studio lights, I told the truth, from my family's favoritism to Thomas's kindness, to the secrets that had shaped my life. The clip spread faster than I'd expected. People wrote to thank me, to share their own stories, to say they finally felt seen. For the first time, my name wasn't just a shadow under someone else's spotlight. After the interview aired, I returned to my apartment, my phone buzzing with messages. Among them was one from an unknown number. The preview line stopped me cold. I need to tell you the rest of the story. It was from my mother. We met at a quiet cafe near the lake, one of those places with chipped mugs and the smell of cinnamon in the air. My mother was already seated by the window when I walked in, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug that had long since stopped steaming. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the past months had carved her down to something fragile. "Lena," she said, her voice unsure. It wasn't the clipped tone I'd grown used to. It was softer, almost tentative. I sat down across from her. "You said you wanted to tell me the rest of the story." She nodded, her eyes flicking to the other customers before leaning closer. "I didn't delete your scholarship email. Jake did. I told him not to, but he's his father's son. And your father, Mitchell. He told me to stay out of it." I studied her face, searching for cracks in the confession. "And the DNA. You knew." "I knew," she whispered, "from the moment you were born. Samuel loved me, but he didn't have the means to protect us. Mitchell made it clear. If I didn't marry him, if I didn't give him your name, he'd ruin Samuel. And later, when I found out what he was doing to Thomas, I tried to stop him. I went to the press, but he caught wind of it. That's when I was told." She swallowed hard. "That's when they said you weren't supposed to survive. It wasn't a threat against me. It was against you. So I stayed quiet. I thought I was keeping you safe." Her words lodged somewhere deep, in that place where anger and grief tangle into something unnameable. We left the cafe and walked down to the lake. The winter wind cut at our cheeks, but we didn't speak. We sat on a bench, the water dark and rippling, our reflections breaking with every wave. For a long time there was only the sound of the wind and the occasional creak of the dock. Finally, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small brass key. It was warm from her hand when she placed it in mine. "It's for the safe," she said simply. The safe was in her apartment, hidden behind a false panel in the closet. It took a few minutes to find the right angle for the key, but when it turned, the door swung open to reveal an old album, a bundle of letters tied with red string, and a thick manila folder. The album was filled with photographs I had never seen. Me as a baby in Samuel's arms, Thomas standing beside us, my mother smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Birthdays, picnics, blurry snapshots of laughter. The letters were from my mother to Samuel, written in secret over the years. In them, she told him about my first steps, my favorite books, the way I laughed when it rained. She wrote about Mitchell's temper, about the ways she'd tried to shield me, about the nights she thought of running away but couldn't risk it. The folder contained evidence, bank statements, correspondence, and a draft of an article she had tried to publish about Mitchell's unethical practices. It was proof she had fought for me, even if I'd never seen it. I sat on the floor for hours, reading, crying, letting the weight of it all settle. When I finally looked up, my mother was in the doorway, her eyes red but steady. I can't undo what happened, she said. But I can give you the truth, and I can give you the choice to forgive me, or not. I thought of Thomas, of the scholarship fund, of the young people who had written to me saying my story gave them hope. I thought of the nights I'd felt utterly alone, and the nights I'd been surrounded by people who chose me. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't for her. It was for me. I forgive you, I said quietly. But I'm not coming back. She nodded, a small smile flickering at the corners of her mouth. I didn't think you would. Weeks later, I left the building where my mother lived, the manila folder tucked under my arm. The sky was the same dull gray as the day this all began. Raindrops spattered against my coat, sliding down to the pavement. At the corner, I paused. Across the street, a college student, maybe 19, was kneeling beside an older man huddled against the wall. She was pressing a paper cup of coffee into his hands, her hood pulled up against the rain. The man's face lifted in gratitude, and for a moment, the years collapsed in on themselves. I smiled, stepping out into the crosswalk. The rain was cold, but it felt lighter somehow. The circle had closed, and yet something new had begun.